How's it going, guys? I'm Mike Dwyer from the Bunker Recordings and BetterMixes.com. And today I want to talk to you about a mixing trick that a lot of people use called the Pultec trick. And more specifically, how to do a more versatile version of it without the need of a Pultec. In fact, you could do this with just your stock EQ. So first, let's just talk about what the Pultec trick is. So here I'm using iZotope's Ozone Vintage EQ, which is a Pultec emulation, but with the bonus of having this graph up here so you can actually see what we're talking about today. But anyway, you may have noticed that instead of just having a gain knob like most EQs will have, where you can either turn it up to boost that frequency or pull it down to reduce that frequency, Pultecs have a separate knob, or in the case of this plugin, slider, for boosting and cutting the low end. So what that means is you can boost and cut at the same time. Now, you might ask what the purpose of that is, and wouldn't that be the same thing as just not doing anything? And with most EQs, like we'll look at Pro Q3 for a second, if you were to boost, say, 70 hertz, and then cut the same amount in the same spot, you can see that we are ultimately doing nothing. But what's interesting with the Pultec is the shape of the boost and the cut are different. So instead of the boost and the cut canceling each other out, they make a new shape, boosting in some spots and cutting in others. So you can see here, I'm just going to crank the boost all the way up. And this is what that looks like. And then if we crank the cut all the way, you can see it's a low shelf. But when we combine them, that's what we get. So in this case, with the frequency set to 45 hertz and both our boost and cut cranked all the way, you can see we are boosting a ton of low end, and then it's slowly tapering off. And then we actually have a dip maybe around 400 hertz or so before coming back up and leveling out just above 1K. So just to put this in perspective, let's hear this on a drum loop. First, here's the drum loop without the Pultec. So it sounds pretty good. Could maybe use it a little bit low end. So why don't we boost that? So now we got a nice thick low end, but it's getting a little bit muddy. So now if we bring our cut in, it should take care of that. So now that's feeling pretty good. Let me just flip this plugin on and off so you can hear the difference. So that's sounding a lot better. We've got a lot more low end happening, but actually a little bit of a dip down in the lower mid-range, which is just cleaning up the mud. But now, let's say you don't have a Pultec plugin. Let's see how we can apply that same principle with a different EQ. In this case, I'll use Pro Q3 because it's my absolute favorite EQ. But like I said, this is all stuff you can do with just your stock EQ plugin. So to create something similar, I'm going to hit play and then I'm going to start boosting our low end to bring some of that thump in. All right, so we added some nice low end, but once again, it's getting a little bit muddy. So now we'll just dip that out. So just like that, we've accomplished a very similar thing. Now, like we saw in the Vintage EQ plugin, the Pultec actually creates this shape using two different shaped shelves, when in this case, I was using a shelf and a bell. You certainly could do it with two different shelves, but I just find it easier to just use a bell curve for the cut. But yeah, that's essentially all the Pultec trick is. Just putting a little dip just past the start of your shelf. Or in reality, this could be a bell shape as well. But let's take a look at the top end and see how we can do something similar. So let's say we wanted to brighten this loop up a little bit. Cool, so that's sounding nice and bright, but it's bringing out a little bit of harshness with it. So let's try ducking that down. And now let's just do a before and after of these high-end moves to see the difference that made. So nice and bright and crisp, but without any of the harshness in the upper mid-range here. And the beauty of doing this with a plugin like FabFilter or your stock EQ or whatever, as opposed to the Pultec, is it's a lot more versatile. Because, with the Pultec, you have a few frequency options here, but that's it. And you can't set a different frequency for the boost and the cut. So while the shape of these filters do work well a lot of the time, hence this trick became a thing, sometimes you might want to switch it up a little bit. Maybe on the low end, you like the boost here, but you want the cut a little bit lower or a little bit higher. You really have the flexibility to tweak it however you want. And I was actually doing this before I ever knew about the Pultec trick or what the Pultec trick was, especially when dealing with the top end. This was something that I learned from reading an interview with Eric Valentine, where he talks about just kind of moving energy in the top end. So by doing the dip in the upper mid-range and then boosting the top end, we're just moving some of the energy from this harsh area up to sort of the prettier area. And obviously the same thing in the low end, just kind of moving some of this energy from the muddy area into the nice thick area. But anyway, let's listen to one last thing. I'm going to take these two bands, or two cuts, and turn these on and off. So with them off, that would just be a couple of standard shelves boosting your top and low end. And then with them on would be our Pultec trick and sort of our high-end modified Pultec trick. So let's hear that. Now, obviously, this isn't going to sound exactly like a Pultec. Well, one, because our frequencies are probably not the same, but even if we had the frequencies spot on, using something like Pro Q3 or your stock plugin isn't going to add any of the color or the harmonics that a Pultec-based plugin would add. But in reality, that could be either a good or a bad thing. But like I said, this is all about the concept behind the Pultec trick and how we can apply it to our mixing. So be sure to give this a shot in your next mix to see if it works for you. And if you did find this video helpful, it would be awesome if you left a thumbs up and subscribed. Also, be sure to head on over to bettermixes.com to grab a free copy of my Ultimate EQ cheat sheet.